The sun goes down over a hillside outside Hebron, and an old man named Abram is on his knees, watching vultures circle a stretch of blood-soaked ground. Behind him lie the halves of a heifer, a goat, a ram, cut down the middle, laid open, one piece facing the other. A dove and a young pigeon rest untouched beside them. The air smells like iron and dust. Somewhere above him, the vultures keep circling, and he has to keep driving them off the carcasses with his own hands, hour after hour, waiting. He has done exactly what he was told to do. He does not yet know why. Then the sun is gone. Darkness falls hard and fast, the kind of darkness that has weight to it, and Abram falls into it too. A deep sleep, the text says, and terror and great darkness. When he wakes enough to see, there is smoke, a firepot, black and smoldering, and a torch of open flame, moving on their own between the split bodies on the ground. Nobody told Abram what was supposed to happen next. In the world he lived in, when two men cut animals in half and walked between the pieces together, they were making a promise. Break this covenant, and let what happened to these animals happen to me. Both parties walked through. Both parties took the risk. But only one walker crosses through the blood on that hillside. Not Abram, not a priest, not an angel standing in for a king. Only the fire, only God. If you have ever wondered what it actually costs God to keep a promise, this is where the answer starts. Not in a sermon, not in a stained glass window, but in a valley, at night, with no one else awake to see it. This is not religious ritual you're watching. This is not just an old man and his flocks. This is not even, first and foremost, about Abraham. This is about what it costs the God of the universe to make a promise to people who keep breaking every promise they make back to him, and about a fire moving alone through a valley of blood that will not make sense for another 2,000 years. Stay with me, because you are about to see 6 times God bends down and makes an agreement with human beings who have absolutely nothing to offer him in return. 6 times he puts his own reputation, his own patience, his own future on the line. And by the end, you will understand why one apostle writing from a Roman prison called the whole thing a mystery hidden for ages, and why the fire in Abram's valley was never really about Abram at all. Go back further first. Before Abram, before the fire in the valley, there is a garden, and there is one command, and it is astonishingly small. Adam and Eve are standing in Eden, everything green, everything provided. And God says, "Eat from any tree you want, except one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Touch that one, and you will die." That is it. That is the whole arrangement. No blood, no smoke, no fire, just a garden, a gift, and a single boundary. Theologians sometimes call it the covenant of works, because it asks for exactly one thing. Trust God's word over your own judgment. Don't decide for yourself what is good. Let him decide. You know how this goes. A serpent asks one question. Did God really say that? And the boundary that was supposed to protect them starts to look like a cage instead. Eve eats. Adam eats. And the text tells us something strange happens immediately. Their eyes are opened, and the first thing they see clearly is their own nakedness. Not wisdom, not power, shame. Here is the tension you need to feel. This is not about a piece of fruit. It is the first time in human history someone traded a relationship with God for the promise of being their own God instead. And once that trade is made,
It cannot be unmade by trying harder. Adam and Eve don't get a second chance at the garden. They get exile, cherubim and a flaming sword guarding the way back in. This is not about punishment for its own sake. This is not God losing his temper. This is not the end of it. This is a wound that every single covenant after this one is trying to heal. Move forward. 10 generations later, the world Adam's children built has curdled into something almost unrecognizable. Genesis says, every inclination of the human heart was only evil, all the time. God looks at what humanity has become, and the text uses a word you don't expect from an all-powerful being. He grieves. He is sorry he made them. There is a man named Noah in the middle of that wreckage, righteous in his generation, which is its own kind of lonely, being the one sober person at a party that has been going on for centuries. God tells him to build an ark, and Noah builds it, plank by plank, for around 100 years by some ancient reckonings, while his neighbors presumably think he has lost his mind. The specifications God gives him are strangely exact for a story you might expect to stay vague. A vessel roughly 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 3 decks stacked one on top of the other, sealed inside and out with pitch. This is not a raft thrown together in a panic.
It is a structure built to a blueprint over decades by a man who has never seen rain, because until this point in Genesis, the earth has never once needed it. Then the flood comes. And when it finally recedes, when Noah steps back onto dry ground with his 3 sons and their wives and every creature that survived, God does something remarkable. He doesn't just spare Noah. He makes a covenant, not just with Noah, not just with humanity, but with every living creature, with the earth itself. Never again, God says, will I destroy all life with a flood. And he hangs his bow in the clouds as the sign. The Hebrew word for that bow, kesheth, is the same word used for a weapon, a war bow. God takes the instrument of judgment and turns it upside down in the sky, unstrung, pointed away from the earth forever. This covenant costs God something specific: restraint. He binds himself unconditionally to patience with a species that has already shown him exactly what it will do with freedom. No conditions on Noah's side, no fine print, just a promise that from now on, judgment will wait. And grief gives way to something else in the next part: hope. But a strange kind of hope, because it starts with an old, childless man in Mesopotamia named Abram, who has no reason to believe the years ahead hold anything but more disappointment. God tells Abram to leave everything: his country, his father's household, the only life he's ever known, for a promise with no collateral. I will make you into a great nation, God says. Abram is 75 years old. He has no children. His wife, Sarai, has been unable to conceive for decades. And yet, he goes. Years pass. The promise doesn't. God takes Abram outside one night and tells him to look up, to count the stars if he can. So shall your offspring be. And here's the detail that should stop you. Abram believes him. Just believes him, with nothing to show for it yet. And the text says, God credited it to him as righteousness. Not obedience earns the covenant. Trust receives it. But belief doesn't erase every question. A few verses later, Abram asks God plainly, "Sovereign Lord, how can I know I will actually possess this land?" It is a fair question. He is an old man with no son, standing in a country that is not his, being told it will belong to descendants he doesn't have yet. God doesn't rebuke him for asking. God answers him with a ceremony. Bring me a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, a young pigeon. And that is how Abram ends up on his knees at sundown, watching vultures circle, waiting for an answer he cannot yet interpret. That is the scene that leads to the valley with the animals cut in half, the fire moving alone through the blood, God signing a promise in a way that puts every consequence of failure on himself. Years later, God adds a physical sign to seal it: circumcision, cutting into the flesh of every male in Abram's household, a permanent mark that says this family belongs to a promise now. The Hebrew word for the whole arrangement, berith, carries the idea of cutting at its root. Because in that world, you didn't just promise something, you cut something, blood or flesh, to prove you meant it. His name changes too. Abram, exalted father, becomes Abraham, father of many, before he has a single child to justify it. So far, that's 3 covenants, and already a pattern is forming. In Eden, God asks for trust and gets betrayal. With Noah, God asks for nothing and gives everything anyway. With Abraham, God doesn't just make a promise, he walks through the blood alone to guarantee it. Every covenant costs God more than it costs the person he's making it with. That is the pattern nobody points out from the pulpit, and it is about to get more expensive, not less. Before we go further, into the mountain of Sinai, into a shepherd-turned-king's palace, into a hill outside Jerusalem where all 6 covenants finally collide, if you have made it this far, you understand this is not a Sunday school retelling. Hit subscribe, because breakdowns like this one come out every week, and drop a comment telling me which covenant surprised you the most so far. I read every one. Fast forward around 400 years. Abraham's family has become a nation of slaves in Egypt, and God sends Moses to bring them out, not into comfort, but into a desert, toward a mountain called Sinai, for a purpose Moses doesn't fully understand yet either. At Sinai, the covenant changes shape. This is not God walking alone through blood while the human party sleeps. This time, God asks the entire nation of Israel to answer him back. If you obey me fully and keep my covenant, he says, you will be my treasured possession, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. And the people, all of them, together, answer, everything the Lord has said, we will do. Moses builds an altar at the base of the mountain, and beside it, 12 stone pillars, one for every tribe descended from Jacob's sons, standing there as silent witnesses to whatever is about to be sworn. Young men offer bulls as fellowship offerings. Moses takes the blood, splits it in half thrown against the altar, half kept in basins, and after reading the covenant out loud to the whole assembly, he takes that second half and sprinkles it on the people themselves. This is the blood of the covenant, he says, that the Lord has made with you. Do you see what just happened? At Sinai, for the first time, the human side of the covenant gets marked by the blood too. Not just God's fire between the pieces, their skin, their promise sealed the same way his was. And they break it in about 6 weeks. While Moses is still up on the mountain receiving the rest of the law, the people are at the bottom of it, melting down their jewelry to build a golden calf, dancing in front of it, calling it the God who brought them out of Egypt. Moses comes down, sees it, and throws the stone tablets, the covenant itself,
to the ground, shattering them. What happens next is brutal to read. 3,000 people die that day, judgment moving through the camp the way the flood once moved through the earth. This is not a footnote you skip past. This is the actual cost of a covenant broken 6 weeks after it was sworn. This is the conviction you're supposed to feel here, because you have made this exact trade. Maybe not with gold and a calf, but with something you built with your own hands and called it security. Something you trusted more than the God who already delivered you once. The Israelites are not a cautionary tale from 3,000 years ago. They are a mirror. Before any of that, though, Moses does something you should sit with for a second. Standing between a furious God and a guilty nation, he goes back up the mountain and says, "Forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." He offers to trade his own name, his own future, his own place among God's people for theirs. Moses doesn't have the power to make that trade actually work, but he is willing to offer it. Keep that willingness in your mind. It's about to matter again, from someone who actually can make the trade. And yet, God doesn't walk away. He calls Moses back up the mountain. He writes new tablets. The covenant is renewed, not because Israel earned it back, but because, as he tells Moses in that same encounter, he is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. Even in the wreckage of a broken covenant, God is already rebuilding a way forward. Centuries later, the stakes climb again.
Israel has kings now, and the best of them, a former shepherd named David, wants to build God a house, a temple, something permanent, something that matches the palace David himself lives in. God's answer, through the prophet Nathan, flips the entire request upside down. The Lord himself will establish a house for you, David is told. Not David building for God, God building for David. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me, God tells him. Your throne will be established forever. Forever is a dangerous word to put in a promise to a human family, because human families fail, and David's family fails spectacularly. His son Solomon slides into idolatry in his old age. The kingdom splits in two. Within a few generations, the northern kingdom is gone, marched off by Assyria. A few centuries after that, Jerusalem itself falls, the temple burns, and David's royal line disappears into Babylonian exile, with seemingly nothing left to inherit. The last king of that line anyone bothers to name in the record, a man named Jehoiachin, spends decades in a Babylonian prison before a new emperor finally lets him eat at the royal table instead of a cell. Not restored to a throne, just fed. A small mercy at the very bottom of a promise that once said, forever. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing decades after Jerusalem fell a second time, still recorded how deep the hope for a king from David's line ran among his people. Proof that 6 centuries after the exile, nobody had forgotten what God had promised, even with the throne long gone. Here is what should unsettle you. God tied his own word, his own reputation, to a family that would eventually have no throne, no kingdom, and no king sitting on either one. Every other covenant king in the ancient world made promises about land and gold and armies. This is a promise that outlives the collapse of everything it was supposedly about. Either God miscalculated, or he was talking about something bigger than David ever understood. By the time the prophets are writing in exile, centuries after David, one of them, Jeremiah, says something that should have stopped every reader in their tracks. "The days are coming," declares the Lord, "when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel." Not a renewed version of Sinai. New. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts, Jeremiah says. And, this is the line that matters most, I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. Every covenant up to this point has required something to be added. Obedience, blood, circumcision, a temple. This one, prophesied 6 centuries before it happens, promises to end the need for reminders of sin altogether. 600 years is a long time to wait for a promise. Jeremiah dies without seeing it. So does every prophet after him. Now go back to the fire. Remember the fire, moving alone between the split halves of the animals in Abram's valley, all those centuries earlier. Hold on to that image because it is about to resolve in a way nobody standing at that hillside could have imagined. It's Passover, roughly 2,000 years after Abraham's fire, 13 centuries after Moses' blood on the altar, 10 centuries after David's throne, 600 years after Jeremiah's prophecy. A rabbi from Nazareth is in an upper room in Jerusalem with 12 friends, and he takes a cup of wine, not water, not a new animal, a cup, and says words that should have made every Jewish person at that table go silent. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for you. New covenant. Jeremiah's words spoken out loud by a man at a dinner table about his own blood before it has even been shed. The Greek word used here, diatheka, means both covenant and last will and testament, which is why what you're holding, if you own a Bible, is called the New Testament and not simply the New Promise. The next day, it is shed. A Roman cross, a hill outside the city walls, nails through wrists that once, according to his own followers, formed the fire that walked through Abram's valley. Paul later writes that this man is the image of the invisible God, that by him all things were created, meaning, if Paul is right, the fire in the valley and the man on the cross are the same person, separated only by 2,000 years of waiting. Here is the detail you were promised at the start. In Abraham's covenant, only one party walked through the split flesh, God alone, taking on himself the full penalty if the covenant should ever be broken. It was broken, not once, over and over, at Eden, at the golden calf, in every human heart since. And the God who signed that promise in the fire does not send someone else to pay it. He does not find a substitute animal one more time. Moses once offered to be blotted out of the book in Israel's place and couldn't follow through. He never had that kind of authority over his own name. This time, the one making the offer and the one with the authority to make it real are the same person. He becomes the flesh that is torn. The body on the cross is broken the way the heifer and the goat and the ram were broken. Except this time, the one walking through the judgment and the one paying for it are the same person. And at the exact moment he dies, something happens back in the Jerusalem temple that almost nobody standing at the cross could have seen, but every priest serving that week would have felt in their bones. The curtain separating the Holy of Holies, the one room only a single man, the high priest, was ever allowed to enter, once a year, carrying blood exactly like the blood at Sinai, tears in two, top to bottom, on its own, by a hand no human standing there swung. Torn, the way the animals in Abram's valley were torn. Split, the way Moses split the blood at the base of the mountain. The barrier that had stood for centuries between ordinary people and the presence of God does not get lowered, it gets ripped open. This is not religious obligation. This is not a debt paid in some abstract legal sense you're meant to accept without feeling it. This is not distant. It is the oldest promise in the Bible, closing the loop it opened in a bloody valley outside Hebron, in the body of the God who made it. Think about it like this. You know what it costs a parent to co-sign a loan for a child who has already defaulted before. Not once, but 3 or 4 times. The bank won't extend more credit on the child's name alone. The child's word is worthless now. So the parent puts their own name on the line instead, their own house, their own future, knowing exactly what the child's track record looks like, knowing the odds. That is what every covenant in this account has been building toward. God putting his own name, his own body in the end, on a promise to people who have already proven, generation after generation, that they will default. And the writer of Hebrews, reflecting on all of this decades later, makes the connection explicit. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness, he writes, and then points back through Sinai's altar, through Noah's ark, through Abraham's fire, to say that Jesus is the mediator of a new covenant, his blood speaking a better word than the blood on the ground centuries before, in the days of Cain and Abel, because that blood cried out for justice, and this blood, the writer says, cries out for something else. Peace.
Augustine, writing 3 centuries after the cross, while the Roman Empire around him was starting to crumble, put it in a sentence that has outlasted the empire itself. The New Testament lies hidden in the Old, he wrote, and the Old is made plain in the New. Every covenant you just walked through, Eden, Noah, Abraham, Sinai, David, was never 6 separate promises. It was one promise, unfolding, waiting for the moment it could finally cost God everything, instead of asking humanity to somehow pay a debt it never had the resources to cover. This is not rule following. This is not religious performance. This is not earning anything at all. That is a fire that walked alone through the blood 2,000 years before it had a body to walk in, and finally arrived. So what do you do with 6 covenants and 1 fire? First, the factual one. Every covenant in the Bible follows the same shape. God initiates, God guarantees, and when the human side fails, God absorbs the cost instead of walking away. That is not incidental to the account. That is the account. Second, the personal one. Whatever covenant you think you have broken, whatever promise to God you have melted down into your own golden calf, whatever forever you were sure you'd keep and didn't, you are not the first, and you are not being asked to fix it by trying harder. Adam wasn't the last person to trade trust for control. Israel at the base of that mountain is not a museum piece. It is every one of us, at least once, maybe more than once. And if you're honest with yourself right now, you already know which covenant you're thinking of. Third, and this is the one that should sit with you longest, the new covenant is not God's backup plan after 5 failed attempts. Jeremiah names it 600 years early. Abraham's fire walks alone 15 centuries early. This was never Plan B. It was the plan the entire time, and the cost was never a secret from God. He signed for it before Abraham ever lit the fire. Here's my question for you, and I actually want to know. Out of everything you just heard, Eden's single boundary, Noah's bow in the sky, Abraham's fire in the dark, Sinai's blood on the people, David's forever throne, or the cup in the upper room, which covenant, if you're honest, is the one you find hardest to believe applies to you? Tell me in the comments. I read all of them, and some of the best conversations on this channel start right there. Because here's the last thing worth saying. A promise that costs the one who makes it nothing
isn't much of a promise at all.
Every covenant in this account cost God something. The last one cost him everything. And he made it anyway.